Thank you, and I'm glad the moderator made references to 50% urban and the new towns issue. I wasn't very sure because the topic is so wide, infrastructure. I too wasn't very sure what is the focus going to be. But since I worked in the urban sector and continue to be active in the sector, I think I'll also focus on the urban issues to start with as part of infrastructure. The moderator referred to the 50% part and 32% being in towns. That itself raises one of the first issues, that is the way we look at urban. If you look at the notified urban bodies only and take the population, that's one way of looking at things. But if the 4,000 plus notified cities and towns, plus close to 4,000 census towns, which become the stepping stone to what you talked about, and about which we don't care much because they continue to fall in the rural areas, that's a big concern. And the two put together, I think it goes much beyond the 32% we normally talk about. And when we talk about that, I need also to mention about the 50% part globally, though that is the trend. We will at least have 4 or 5 states in our country which will be crossing the 50% limit as per the normal census figures which we are going to have. So those states at least have to take note of the fact that urbanization is bound to be there and one has to address the issues of urbanization. Most unfortunately, since we continue to believe that India lives in villages, there wasn't much attention on what needs to be done in urban areas, at least to ensure basic living standards for people, not to talk of some of the other facilities which most of the modern cities claim. And we have a mixture of cities, some of the largest cities in the world. I think Mumbai also will become the second largest city in the world in the next couple of years. So we have a mix of cities where cities are growing fast, where wealth is growing, and also population is growing, and there is a terrible lack of facilities as far as the basics are concerned. I was in a discussion 2 days back when we talk about metro projects for cities, people immediately come up with points about what about buses? We first need to invest in buses. So should we be taking a stand that we first provide for buses, and when that is saturated, then we think about what is the next best urban mass transit solution. I'm reminded of the focus placed on the national highways. If we hadn't started focusing on building this type of national highways, and if we had waited for the district roads to be appropriate and village connectivities to be ensured, I'm not in any way saying that that's not required. But if we had waited for that, and only after all that had happened, we had thought about national highways, what would be the amount required to invest, and where would that come from? Similar is the argument as far as improving mobility in cities is concerned. Of course, we have to improve our bus services. There is a National Urban Transport Policy of 2006 which talks about all these things to be done. But most unfortunately, left to states, this does not seem to be happening. That's why the Government of India had to take the first initiative of the Urban Renewal Mission in 2005. And that trend continues, and currently we have all these programs with which you must be familiar. I need not repeat these. The Amrit Smart Cities, Hriday, Housing for All, and Swachh Bharat, and of course support for metros. These are some of the key programs which are being implemented in cities. But I think for investment to happen, first of all, there is requirement of adequate government support and interest, because urban is not going to happen just like that. If we go by the experience of our first urban renewal mission, some PPPs got started, but there is this argument that since cities got used to a sort of a grant culture from the government, they did not enter the other path of becoming competitive and becoming a real competitor in the market to get resources generated. Credit rating of cities was started, but somehow it got sidelined. Once again, there is some emphasis. Service level benchmarks was a concept which was introduced so that cities constantly benchmark themselves as to where they stand. And that was a requirement. That also got sidelined over a period of time. And the recent, what you have heard about the livability index, I consider all these continuing measures which should be there as far as cities are concerned. And ideally, when cities present their budgets, I think they should also come up with statements as to where they stand with regard to service level benchmark, where they stand with regard to livability standards, and where they stand with regard to rating of the cities. So with rating improving, earlier there were bond issues by some of the city bodies that also more or less stopped, but now we have a new trend of cities like Pune taking the initiative, so that culture has to spread. But for all this to happen, we simultaneously also have to think in terms of how empowered are we going to make our cities. Without that, continuing with the same existing structure, there isn't much hope for our cities to be on their own. So there other issues also would come. What about the sources of revenue, parting with some more sources or sharing more resources and making them as self-reliant as possible? There again, the services issue comes. We have to think in terms of charging for the services we provide. We have committee reports which have talked about lack of interest and lack of attention as far as operation maintenance is concerned. Local bodies left to themselves either are not in a position or everyone wants to see new projects and new things happening so that it appeals to the electorate. So we have to move away from that culture. That also got started, but I'm not very sure whether that is continuing the way it should be. We should be ready to pay for our services, but at the same time there should be a guarantee that the services which an ordinary citizen or a resident of a city is entitled to becomes available. And that's where some of the other benchmarks, as I mentioned, become relevant. And some such emphasis is there in the current programs. I do hope that happens, and I think I'll stop at this stage, and if there are some further points to discuss, I suppose those will come up during discussion.